This is Anay from Anything for Geeks, and today we are going to talk about the history of literature. Now, the history of literature is a deep and complex subject, but do not worry. Today we are going to be discussing some simple stuff, and also we are going to be listening to a story, which is very nice. So, literature is very powerful today, and many people like reading books. Many people love reading books. Perhaps some people don't like reading books. Like maybe you're really mad at that summer reading list that your teacher gave you last year, and now you're just wondering, how am I going to read all of this now? But reading can be powerful, and reading really enhances our minds. And today we're going to talk about the history of why and how reading was developed, and why people even write stuff or read stuff. So, reading is a way to pass down knowledge. It's nonfiction. Like if you're reading a science magazine, you're getting all that knowledge from scientists who discovered something. And for example, let's say you're reading about maybe scientists found a new mineral that is a super mineral that when ingested or when people eat it, it just boosts everything up and people are all right, and sick people, it's a medicine. And you're getting this knowledge from that book or that magazine that you're reading. Similarly, maybe you're reading a geometry book or you're doing stuff in the textbook for school. You're learning geometry then, and geometry is a concept that was founded by people long ago, and they wrote down that knowledge that they gained, and that knowledge was passed down after a long time to you. And writing is an incredibly old process. Writing has been around for at least 6,000 years, but in comparison with how long humans have been, which is 120,000, it means that only 20%, and not even 20%, really little, 5% of our history has been spent with books and writing and stuff like that. So how and why did writing develop? First, we have to go to spoken language. So the first way to tell a story or any kind of knowledge, because stories are basically a knowledge that's been encoded into something funny or angry or sad or anything that causes an emotion. And basically, we talk to convey information. We talk to convey ideas. So I'm conveying this idea about the history of literature, or this concept about the history of literature, to you guys who are watching this video right now. And videos are actually also a form of conveying ideas. Books are not the only form. Any type of art actually conveys an idea. Like paintings convey an idea. It's an abstract idea. Music is an abstract idea. Like podcasts, audiobooks, and videos, they all convey ideas as with books. And speech also tells us, so that's kind of like podcasts and audiobooks, except you're just directly telling it to somebody. And that's where spoken language falls short. If you're telling something to someone, you can only tell that to a group of people right around you. And recording software has not been around for long, so yeah, don't think of recording your voice and passing it around to others, because that would not have worked for probably 6,000 years. And yeah. So why did spoken language develop as well? And why do we actually need to convey information? First of all, conveying information that one individual discovered to the whole society is necessary for our survival. Without language or writing or some way to convey information, us humans would have been extinct long, long ago. And that means that it is absolutely necessary. And first, why? Why is it necessary for survival? Us humans are primates, and primates are mammals, and mammals are animals. And animals generally have some form of defensive structure on their bodies. For example, a turtle has a shell, a crocodile has thick, tough scales. Many animals have spikes or thorns, or like the thorny devil, it has countless spikes on its body. And some animals have regenerative properties. For example, lizards and octopuses can lose tails and arms, and they can grow them back quickly, which is another useful form of defense. But sadly, us humans, without anything like armor or chest plates and mail coats and helmets, we're basically defenseless. Our lack of grappling, climbing feet and hands means that we are not very adequate in trees. I mean, I know that lots of kids love to climb, but we're just not as good as, say, a squirrel or even a monkey, which is a close relative of ours, in a tree. And we're just adapted to walking on ground. Really, the only defense that we have with just our own bodies and nothing else is just to turn around and bolt from anything that's about to attack us. Running is the only skill that we have that's useful for defense. And also, humans are not very smart. I mean, we're much more smarter than a bacteria, but we're actually not as smart as we would like to think we are. That's only because of collective learning. For example, a sperm whale, an adult sperm whale has more processing power in its brain than an adult human has, which means that it technically is smarter. But a sperm whale, although it's very social and it's one of the most social animals on Earth, the part of the brain that develops language is not as developed as, say, in humans. And thus, we are the only animals to develop a fully spoken language. Yes, I know that dolphins have their own language, but it is not as developed. And also, we have hands. Hands are pretty useful for writing, whereas a flipper is not so useful for grabbing or writing. And that enables us to convey ideas by both speaking and writing down stuff that we discovered. This is crucially important because, as aforementioned, we do not have a lot of skills, and so we need a lot of knowledge amongst a group, not one individual. Not one individual surviving from a whole group is not of much use. We need the whole group to survive. So one human group has to learn a whole skill together. One guy discovers a skill and then he has to tell it to everybody else, or it's just not gonna be there. And you might be wondering, why do we have such developed brains? Why can't other animals just do this? Because they're stronger physically, they have much more muscle, and they're adapted to one specific environment. Us humans, not so. We congratulate ourselves on being adaptable, but that means that we're not really that adapted to one environment, so everything's dangerous for us, just like everything is safe for us. And that can be a problem if you're a defenseless species that can just walk and run. So we need collective learning. Collective learning is the term, and collective learning is the most important thing. So, for example, chimps, like chimpanzees. They are our closest living relatives. They share 96% of our DNA, and which means that like we're 4% human, and the chimpanzee is like 96% the same as us. But chimpanzees cannot achieve the level that we've risen to in the biological hierarchy because they do not have a form of collective learning. Chimps are not known for being particularly social. Yes, they live in groups, they share, but they're extremely violent and they are also very physically strong. Like, well, one chimp is only the size of like a kid like me. It has the strength of 5 people. And yeah, that is very strong in human terms. But humans are not strong. So humans need collective learning to enhance their skills and their chances of survival, whereas chimpanzees are adapted. They have the strengths and the weaknesses that make them top predators in the Congolese rainforests. Writing is the most important way of collective learning as of now, and writing developed a long time after speech, which is very strange because you would expect that when speech had developed, we would quickly realize that writing was important, but here's the reason why. Writing ensures that you can pass down your ideas across time and across a lot of space with no changes, because spoken stories change every time they're told. That's why stories get so different over time. But a book cannot be easily changed. I mean, you can rewrite the book, but then it wouldn't be that book anymore. And thus, writing is important in delivering a honest and truthful and unchanged account. But we didn't really need this a long time ago, because we lived in small groups pretty close to each other, and besides we didn't have trade or anything, so we didn't need long distance communication. Thus we could just tell a story to our close family and friends and just chill. However, when the first civilizations formed, people were already out of Africa, people were in Africa, people were in the Middle East, people were in Europe, people were in Asia, people were already in South America and North America. And that means that, there was some need for long-distance communication, because most of the civilizations in Africa, Europe, and Asia were interconnected by a system of complex trade, and that meant that some form of writing had to be created. And speech is actually a very old stuff. Speech actually comes before humans. Their ancestors already had a rudimentary language, but writing is something that's special to us, especially because we were the first species to make a civilization. And yeah, so what was the first writing? Writing first developed in a region and a kingdom called Sumer, which is in modern-day Iraq. And Sumer used a system called cuneiform, which basically translates to wedge shape. And cuneiform is called that because it is written by using a stylus, which is kind of like this wooden pen-shaped rod. Think a skewer, and it is pressed about diagonally at an angle against soft clay tablets, creating these tiny little triangles, and forming many of those triangles you can get a syllable, and so a lot of these wedges create a sentence, and so on and so forth. And you can actually try this. Cuneiform does not have any set letter system. The Sumerians had a set alphabet for themselves, and their descendants and their followers would also eventually create their own writing systems based off cuneiform for their own languages. And you can do this as well. You can create your own alphabet. You can write cuneiform for any language that you know. Just go to your local craft supply store, buy a bucket of clay, and then you can get that clay, roll it into a ball, and then press it flat until it forms like a pancake-like shape. Then you can square it a bit, and then take a kitchen skewer, a wooden skewer, the stuff that you put on barbecues, and then just start wedging the clay, and you get cuneiform. Simple. And cuneiform was the major writing system of the Sumerians, and Sumer had the world's first known literature. We don't know that it was the first, but for now it is the first literature ever. And this first literature in the world from Sumer is called the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was a legendary king of Uruk, a city in the south of Sumer. And the Epic of Gilgamesh, as you might have guessed, is about this king. And the Epic of Gilgamesh has a lot of morals, and it also features a trope, which is kind of like an event or a situation that occurs in a setting or the basis for a story. And so we'll jump right into the Epic of Gilgamesh. So, at the beginning of the Epic of Gilgamesh, in Sumerian, there's a lot of poems celebrating Gilgamesh, oh, the king of Uruk did this, and Gilgamesh did that. And that's basically the first part of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the rest is actually not written at this time, and the poems are the first literature. The rest would come quite a bit later, but we'll jump right into it because otherwise this wouldn't make sense. So following these poems, we get an introduction. Gilgamesh is this really successful king of Uruk. He is extremely rich, arrogant, and powerful, all those things that a good absolute monarch should be. And he displeases the gods by his arrogance, and the gods of Sumer, sent this guy called Enkidu, and Enkidu's mission is to basically fight, overthrow, and either kill or depose Gilgamesh from his throne. And eventually, Enkidu and Gilgamesh fight in a wrestling match, and Gilgamesh actually wins against Enkidu, and the pair actually become friends, surprising the gods and leaving them not so happy. Enkidu and Gilgamesh later take on a huge monster called Humbaba, and after they kill Humbaba, they start cutting down the cedar forest which Humbaba guards, obviously before he died, and Enkidu is suddenly killed by the gods in a fight with the Bull of Heaven, which was also sent by the gods because Enkidu and Gilgamesh displeased them. Mourning Enkidu's death, Gilgamesh seeks immortality so that he does not die like his friend. He eventually meets the goddess of fermentation, the goddess of fermentation, who tells him that, quote, you will never find immortality, for when the gods made man, they allotted death to him, and immortality for the gods. And realizing this, Gilgamesh ultimately continues his search for immortality, and meets Utnapishtim, an old man who also tells him the same stuff that the goddess of fermentation did. And he also says that Gilgamesh must respect the gods, and in return the gods will give him many favors and a long life, and stuff like that. And Utnapishtim also tells Gilgamesh a story, so basically this is a story inside a story, about how the gods decided to send a flood to destroy. The gods sent a messenger to Utnapishtim. Actually, the gods themselves tell Utnapishtim to pack his stuff up, take his family, build a ship, take every animal with him, and just sail off until the flood ends. Sounds familiar, anyone? Well, this is the trope that I was talking about, the flood trope. The flood trope is found in many stories, and it is very common. For example, the example here in the most familiar Noah story in the Abrahamic text, the Bible, the Quran, and the Torah. And there are also other stories, for example, the Native American Ojibwe tribe or the Anishinaabe tribe. They have their own flood stories. Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, the Polynesians, they have their own flood stories to tell as well. And even in Asia, like in India, there is a story of the fish Matsya, who is in reality a god, who tells Manu, the first and holiest man, to also pack his stuff up and get out before the water comes. And there is no universal explanation for exactly why this flood trope exists, because it's like global. But the most likely answer is that this story was from when people just first started spreading out and before civilization. And that's because when the Ice Age occurred, like ice started melting down at the end. Like we had all these glaciers, and then everything started melting down, releasing massive floods across the world. Like in places where you had glaciers, the world was literally submerged for a while. In places where there were no glaciers, the sea levels rose up because water from places which had glaciers were slowly flooding in to the oceans, and thus sea levels as a whole started to rise, which meant that islands, such as the Polynesian islands, would have been completely overwhelmed. And here, the importance of the ark is acknowledged, the ark or the ship of said heroes. And that's because in a flood, the people who knew how to handle boats and how to steer boats would be the only people that could survive, because they could just float on top of the flood while everything else under them died. Simple. And after hearing this story, returning to the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh realizes that he has done some very bad things, and he returns to the city of Uruk to rule the rest of his days peacefully and to redeem himself. And he soon gives up his quest for immortality, but indeed he is made immortal finally by the gods. But not literally, because obviously he dies, and Gilgamesh was actually a real king. Obviously he didn't meet Enkidu or kill Humbaba, but like historians believe that Gilgamesh was actually, in fact, a real king, and the epic was actually made to honor him with quite a lot of exaggerations. But anyway, Gilgamesh was a good guy in the end. He died, and then his kingdom passed to his son, and so on and so forth. But Gilgamesh was such a good guy when he returned that his legacy was made immortal, and he was encoded in the epic itself. So, with the story of the story, I guess Gilgamesh finally got what he wanted. He got to be immortal. There may like morals and things in this story. Number one is be honest and be kind, and also like forgive and show mercy to your enemies, is seen when Gilgamesh actually becomes best friends with Enkidu after defeating him, which is important to note. And the other moral is be good and be submissive and respect the gods. And the third moral is if you want to get immortal, just do good stuff and you'll be remembered. But if you go on a wild goose chase, then well, your life is just wasted. And yeah, that's actually it. The Epic of Gilgamesh is it's a very important text. Because, like, it's the first literature, it's the first story that historians have, and it shows how early civilizations were developing and how the immorals of today's civilizations were still influenced, they still influence early civilizations. And yeah, that's actually it for today. I'll see you in the next video. Please like and subscribe. And share this video with your friends, comment, all that fun stuff. Bye!